So welcome everyone to today's Tech Tips. We're going to be covering assets and progress tracking in ACC Build. So my intent today is to show you some kind of the basics, maybe do a quick overview of assets. And I feel like it's one of the modules that a lot of our customers are either not utilizing at all or underutilizing it. Because maybe on the surface, everyone views assets as a one-trick pony, but I've found in a lot of applications and a lot of implementations that we've done, we can utilize assets to do a lot more than maybe what it's intended to do on the surface. So hopefully you guys get some value out of today's presentation, and I'm totally open to questions and discussion. So as Lori mentioned, after I go through my quick little overview, fire away. Give me some good questions or good topics, that can lead us to some other discussion around assets. So that next slide here is just our typical tech tips. The intent here is that these are somewhat unscripted presentations, so I have no problem going down different rabbit holes based on the questions that are provided in the Q&A panel. And yeah, loose agenda. So as I go through things that might spark different ideas or want to show you something that I hadn't thought of in my planning going into this. All right, well, let's save that for the end. So anyway, yeah, I don't like to use PowerPoints too much for these tech tips. I'd rather just jump right into the product. So I will go ahead and do that. All right, so the assets module in ACC Build. You do have to have Autodesk Build to get access to assets. And I've prepared a project here using a model. So I'll show you the process that goes into that to create these assets, kind of auto-generate them from a model. But I'll show you really the two methods to build the assets within ACC Build. So to start off here, what we're looking at is just the simple assets module. I am a project manager on this, or a project admin rather. So I do have full access to edit and customize this environment. From a general project member perspective, if you are granted permissions to view assets, you would see a similar page to this. But because I am a project admin, I do have the ability to create new assets, import assets, and also adjust any of the settings that go along with assets. So really high level, very quickly here. The two ways that we can build assets within this module are either manually by creating them line by line items. You can think of those almost like a data point or an entry point where you would manually build out the asset. So I kind of kept this one blank on purpose. I called it managed assets just to demonstrate this. So as a project admin, if we want to generate a managed asset within our project, all we have to do is create asset, give it a name. I'll talk about the different statuses that we can pick from or choose, but we can generally, if I keep this to specified initially, I can change that later on. We can pick a project location, which I'll also talk about that, description, and then assign a barcode to that specific asset. So very, very simple data entry here. And if I create that, it generates a single line item that I can then click on and manage the information for that project asset without it having to be tied to anything specifically in a model. So I'll get to maybe my thought on this and how we've used it in different scenarios, but at a base level, this gives you the ability to create these different trackable items within your projects that aren't tied to, or you're not handcuffed by a model in order to create a custom asset. Really, really simple and easy. There is also the ability to import an entire list. So I'll go through this really quick. Yeah, I want to do that, and then I'll jump into how you can pull in your assets from an actual Revit model. But if we go into import assets, so probably generally the first time that you build your asset data set within a project, you're not going to have a formatted Excel file just ready to go. Maybe if you template something down the road, you would have something that you can build off of. But Autodesk does give us a sample file that is an Excel file. So let me download the sample and show this. Let's see, is it going? Sometimes it takes a second. There we go. And all right, so you're probably familiar with seeing a spreadsheet formatted like this in different areas of build, like your submittals, locations. They have these kind of templates that we can input data and then import into a specific module. So this one here just gives us an example of the formatting that is required when we go to import. So what's kind of cool about this is, they do have some different lines. This one will actually break because I don't have these categories created in my current asset module. So I would have to name this, enable my editing here, change the category to, I think it was managed assets, and then just through the spreadsheet, populate those cells. Any of these columns that are highlighted in this kind of gray are required. Anything else is not required for entry, so I can leave these blank. Status, let's just put specified. That kind of clears out the status of these components. And then if I do a quick save of this import, so I didn't change any of the asset names or anything here. You could definitely change those values, preparing this for import, make them custom to what you want. Fill out this entire sheet initially, but this gives us a good starting point, even just using what we have here, and we can always overwrite these later. So let's see, that's asset import 8. So as you can tell, I've done this before. And let me go choose file. I think that should have gone directly in my downloads. And let's see, all the way to the top. Open that. All right, import. And hopefully, all right, it's going to say, hopefully I didn't get any errors, but sometimes to troubleshoot this, I probably did something wrong here. Now let's see. Don't delete the columns. Description. It could be that this status, maybe it doesn't allow us to do specified, so we'll just do installed. The specified is kind of the default. It's not really in status. And hopefully, let me jump back to here real quick. Let me make sure that I picked, all right, installed is one there. So let's try that. And I did call that managed assets. Cool. So these do have to match up pretty much one-to-one with what we've set up. So if I typed in my category wrong in that mapping, I would get an error. All right, so that was it. Cool. It's always good when you can troubleshoot and figure it out on the fly like that. So as you can see, it just brought these in based off of the spreadsheet that I imported. It gives me that initial kind of push into ACC. And from there, if you do have spreadsheets, maybe you have a schedule that you pulled from Revit or AutoCAD or any other place that has just the data that you're trying to manage within the project. Hopefully it's in a CSV or a spreadsheet format, but you can start to copy and paste that information from whatever external database or external source that you have and populate it within that spreadsheet and then import it for this to populate. I'll show you a couple of kind of pretty cool things about the way that this import export works. So right now I showed you, I just use the standard template to push some information, build some assets within the asset module. From here, if I export this out, and I'll point out here, there are a couple of custom fields, and I'll show you how to create these in a minute, but I created this supplier and primary contact. These are custom fields, they are not out of the box. So I might as well just show this here. Custom field, supplier, and primary contract. If we look at that default import template, they're not going to have those custom fields because they're not part of the kind of the standard out of the box assets module. But once we've got this imported in, once we have some data, we can then export this out. So let me go back to my managed assets. I'm going to export these 6 items from my managed assets category that I created into an Excel file. So run that report, download it, and now this will serve as the spreadsheet that I will use to basically copy and paste any new information that I want to import in. So once you have that template, the few assets imported, you can then export this report and it will pull in your custom fields. Now, primary contact, I'll show you in the custom fields area. I made this a text, so I can just type in any text value there and drag it through the list. Save the asset detail. Imported this one. And let's see, might have to refresh my page. I don't know why that didn't automatically show up. That should have input the primary contact. Let's double check here. Did I save it? John Smith, primary contact. Oh, screwed something up here in my setup. So one thing I forgot, this is pretty critical for these custom fields. I associated the custom fields that I created with this other category that I created earlier today that I extracted from my model. But in the managed assets, what I failed to do here is assign my custom fields to this asset category. So I have to do that once I add those. Okay, kind of a weird thing. You would think that, hey, if it shows up in the export, then we should be able to plug in a value, import it in, and it would show up. You still have to map those custom fields to the appropriate categories. So that spreadsheet can get pretty crazy if you've got a lot of categories and each category has different custom fields associated to it. But let me jump back here. Now let's see if I import. I don't think I have to go back and save or do anything with the spreadsheet, but now that I've added the custom field, let's see, it should populate. There we go. All 6 of those with the primary contact. Now, the reason that I didn't do supplier, let me get into the weeds a little bit here. When we create custom fields that we want to use and associate them to different assets in our projects, there are different field types that we can choose. So if I say, all right, I've got supplier contact, maybe we just want to have internal manager or internal, we'll call it internal point of contact, POC. Now, these custom field types, we can have text, numeric values, simple pass and fail, which is, I think it's a drop down. It might be a radial button or something, some logic there, a drop down, multi-select, and then a date. So actually, if I make this a date format, or if I make it a multi-select, which is what I did for supplier, the tricky thing here is if you're managing or trying to input values into your spreadsheet for your import, you need to make sure that your values match up perfectly. So if I do internal point of contact and I choose drop down and say Jane Doe, John Smith, Lori, it's one T or two T's? I think it's Lori, is it two? We'll just add, if it isn't, it's two now, two T's. So
it is two T's.
Awesome. So if I make these preset values of my dropdown, the advantage here is that you're going to limit people to only picking the appropriate items from a dropdown list. But in the example, sorry to pick on you, Lori, but if we misspelled Lori Elliott in our spreadsheet, maybe we use one T instead of two, then it will not match up to the import and it will fail on you. It doesn't necessarily always tell you how it fails, and I can show you that. I've had some issues with this where I've done specifically that, created drop-down values for different vendors, and had S on the end instead of it not having an S, like it was a plural company. I don't know how you describe that, but it didn't match up perfectly, and I kept getting an error upon importing. So I just had to review to make sure my custom fields and these values matched up perfectly with what I was inputting. Now, if you were to create some type of Excel template, I'm sure you could do a lookup table, like a list value that had everything married up perfectly to what you're inputting into the asset custom fields. But it's just something that you have to be aware of. It will fail the import. It won't just ignore the mistake and import everything else. If I spelled Lori here with Elliott with one T and added her as the supplier, save this, go back into my assets. And what else did I have to do? Make sure that my custom field, the custom field is assigned to my managed asset. So I'd have to add this internal point of contact to my managed asset category. And then when we go to import that, this is going to fail on purpose, right? So go to import. You will get this message in the bottom here, processing, blah, blah, blah. It will send you, your request can be processed. And it always tells you this, please contact customer support. So sure, if we wanted to take the time for them to find our mistake, but in order to correct that, I would just have to validate and verify. Add a T to the end there. Save it. So it has to match up to the specific drop-down values that we have. So that's just one example. I'm sure there's other examples with multi-select and some of the other items, like a date format, but obviously have to be formatted as the appropriate date format in order to import it in. But you just have to make sure that the data that you're entering in the spreadsheet that you're populating matches up to these custom fields, the values that you create in the ACC environment. So supplier here, I've got a few different mock-up supplier names for steel, and then my internal POC. We can manually select these to enter the information. Did I already import that? All right, let's choose that. Let's save the new file, bring this in, import it. What happened this time? Save. Let's refresh. Probably have to go just to this one here. So, that's weird. Anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time troubleshooting that. I'm sure I did something wrong. Maybe I just have to clear that value out. Let's try it one more time. What else did I change in my spreadsheet? Oh, what happened here? My sample one still has the status specified, so we just need to go. Let's try that now. Someone probably caught that in the Q&A. Everyone's usually pretty sharp on these, so. If it doesn't work this time, we're moving on to models. All right, I screwed something up, but we'll get into the model asset. So hopefully that clears up some of the ways that we can import rather than having to sit here and create these assets manually. It would take hours. These status sets here, I'll point out that, maybe I just delete this one. I bet if I exported this now, since I added the new custom field, it'd probably be better to export it as a new CSV or XLS and then edit it and re-import it. But okay. So the other advantage, if you are working with projects that have Revit models, the Revit model has a ton of data packed into it for all of the different elements that we basically place in the entire Revit model. So all of our 3D elements can be extracted as an individual asset. One thing that I did here when I set this data set up is I focused on structure and just made some pretty basic subcategories of structural for columns, connections, foundations, and framing. And then through a process of mapping, which I'll show you how that's done, I was able to map, basically extract those elements from the Revit model in order to create all of these different assets within these subcategories. So I didn't sit here and manually enter this in. I didn't create a spreadsheet and import it. The advantage you have of having an actual model is you can extract the data from it. So it's something to consider if you're working with consultants and they're providing you, say, LOD 300 level model. We want to verify that the equipment that they're placing or the components that they're placing, in our contracts, that they're identifying that they are placing unique objects, or I guess it doesn't have to be a unique object if it's repeated, because it will still be able to extract individual elements. But we want to have some information that ties to that model to tell us that, hey, this is an air handling unit. It's using the right Revit category. It's a 3D Revit family rather than just a simple 2D representation of an object. So the way that I mapped this model information from Revit in our settings. So I placed this housing structural model, the LTU housing structural model, within the files area of my project. And then to add it here, you just pick the available model. I could do this with the architectural model, maybe show everyone an example here. It would be a good one for architecture. Let me first. So usually before I start mapping things to my assets, in the categories area of settings, I expand my model assets. So this was a category that I created just to separate anything that was a managed asset created individually, like a 2D, call it a 2D, but it's really not 2D, it's just information. But if anything that I'm extracting from the model, I just made a separate category. to identify that all of the things under model assets really are extracted from the Revit model. And then from there I had structural, and then I created subcategories. Pretty intuitive how to create these subcategory levels. So from model assets here, if I wanted to create a subcategory for architecture, and then under architecture, let's just make this one doors. So kind of have to create the buckets before we throw anything into them. So my bucket is created. And then from models, we're going to add a model. The architectural model is already uploaded here, so I'm going to pick that. And then kind of, I call it like a little asset wizard. You click on the appropriate model, and then this will allow you to map the assets from that. So in this case, I want to just expand my categories to say, okay, I'm going to be mapping all of my doors from the architectural model initially here. And based on their Revit category, I should be able to easily filter out and find, let's see, contains, or should be equals in this case, doors. But one thing I'll point out here is that this property box, depending on how you want to map your assets, you can get into extremely granular detail, granular properties within the model. It doesn't have to be by Revit category. It could be by keynote number, a type mark, a number of different things. Basically, if it's a parameter within the Revit model, whether that is a custom shared parameter or an out-of-the-box parameter, this is smart enough to extract from that database and find those properties. So we can filter and we can add multiple logic to this. In this case, Revit category equals doors. I don't really need to add any additional rules to that. If I wanted to separate out exterior doors to interior, I could add a different rule, but I would have to have a subcategory of doors then and map them individually or map them separately. So just search to show our results. There's probably quite a few. This housing project has dorm rooms. So yeah, there are 319 assets that it's finding. You see that it lists these all out with their Revit name, which includes the Revit unique ID, which is really nice. Save that. 319 assets are mapped to doors now. And then the last step here, we can map specific properties to those doors. So if I go to map properties, these are all of the available defaults. I could add custom fields to this, but I just haven't gone through and added a custom field to the doors category. But description, if we were to say, okay, I want to pull in a description, maybe just call that the Revit family type into the description field. Again, just pulling that property information and putting it, assigning it to the asset. These two, status and location, have these little info buttons next to them. Status would probably be something we wouldn't really map from a model unless someone's managing like progress status within a Revit model, which I don't know that anyone is doing that. I'm sure there's some people doing it, but I haven't met anyone that does that. Location though, could definitely be one that we would want to associate to an individual asset. What it's telling us here is that in order for our location to be extracted or match the asset properly, there are two things that have to happen. One, we have to have something available in Revit, call it a room number, that we could then map to that model property. But then also on the project in ACC, we have to make sure that those room numbers are all included in our ACC project. So you have to, kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier with custom fields, the values have to match what you're extracting from the model in order for it to associate properly. which I haven't done in this one, but I've tested this out in the past, not with model assets. I think you could, well, actually I have grabbed like a room schedule and just made that a CSV, imported it into the locations of my ACC project. And then when doing this model properties, I just picked this and mapped it to the room name right there. So it's possible to do that. I haven't set this one up because I didn't extract anything from that room schedule in the first place. So I'll just keep that blank. All right. And once we've done that, 319 is not huge. I validated a lot more. That didn't take too long, and the import should be very quick. All right. So the benefit of having a model available is now I have all of these different doors that I can manage. Getting into status. So this is where I think that this can be, assets is an extremely powerful tool. We can make these, I don't know why that automatically assigned it to ordered, but we can associate and we can update the status of objects either from the desktop like I'm doing now by clicking on an individual asset item, changing the status here, or when we're doing site walks, punch lists, or I'm sorry, checklists within the site through the mobile app. And I set this up not realizing or not thinking that we're using GoToMeeting and not Teams. So I had it set up on my mobile app to show you, but you can search these assets through the ACC Build app, or now it's just called the ACC mobile app. You can search for your different assets in the project, and you can change the status mobily, and it will update to the project. So you might be wondering, well, that's great, but wouldn't that be time consuming to search for specific pipe or specific steel beam? Yes, and what you can do, depending on how you're shipping your product out to the site or how it's being tracked, within assets, you can also associate a barcode to individual assets. That barcode can be derived from, your typical, I think it's like a 9-digit barcode number, or you can also, even though they call it barcode, you can associate QR codes to objects, print them off on a QR printer and add a sticker to an object. And then in the field, as long as that barcode value matches up to your asset, you can scan the asset in the field. It will pull up basically exactly what we're seeing here. And then you can enter the information in the field that will then tie back to the system. So we can change things like the status of an object, if it's been delivered to the site, when it's been installed, and really any additional progress that we want to build into specific assets. Out of the box, the status sets for assets, the defaults, include all of these different, statuses, but we are able to create our own. So you saw with my structural, I had ordered, delivered, and installed. So basically simplified the list, and then we can associate that status set to specific categories within the project. These do have to be the top level category, so I couldn't go into architecture and change the status set. So really, if I were to do this in a real example, instead of having model assets and managed assets, we would have to have these as our top level if we wanted to have different status sets associated to them. But pretty cool stuff. ACC used to have they rolled out a progress tracking beta like a couple of years ago, and then they removed it. The progress tracking beta in Build basically kept everything separate from assets. So you could mark up, or you could click on objects within your sheets and associate like a status to them. Now they've basically integrated all of that functionality into assets. The one thing that I feel like they removed, and I'm sure that at some point this will be updated, the progress tracking had some really cool dashboards and visuals that would allow you to see overall, based on categories or based on equipment, what the status of individual objects were, what percent complete of the progress of installation was. We can still do that. So the progress tracking part of it is a little bit more, I wouldn't call it tedious, but through the export of your assets. So I can take my entire category list of all of the assets that I've created in the project, export that to a CSV or an Excel, and then create those visuals using the Microsoft products. You could tie this to a Power BI dashboard and then put the Power BI dashboard into the Insights module within Build. But unfortunately, they removed some of that integrated visualization to your progress tracking. So the method now, and I even pulled this up just to verify that I'm correct on this. The only way that we're really able to progress track in a visual of all of the different information that we built into the project is by exporting to a report and then visualizing that report with other tools. So if you look in your help topics, they even talk about progress tracking and some of the cool stuff here. Like this is how that progress tracking dashboard looked. So give us some of these little cards, display options. Now we just have to manually create those based on the data that we're extracting from the module. It does export in your data extraction if you're familiar with, in our last session, I think I talked about the Power BI dashboards and the database that you can extract from ACC. These are all data points that are built into that extraction. So you can link this database to your Power BI desktop and create your own visuals, update the database, and it's going to update those visuals. But unfortunately, there's nothing just out of the box kind of pre-built into Build anymore with these visuals. Let's see. One last thing, and then I'll take a look at the questions. I know I'm already 10 minutes over my typical time. Another thing I like to point out, and I just uploaded these sheets right before the presentation, but so I don't, I'd have to identify, specifically where something was in a sheet. I should point out before I do that, that one really nice and quick way to get to a model asset, if I click on this door here, so I changed the status to say installed, all of your assets have a link to the model, and that will take you to a 3D view of the model and zoom in to that specific element. So if you wanted to view where it was or the context of that, view the properties, the additional Revit properties of that door. So I can see here this door, let's see what level. So that's on the 4th floor. I didn't publish the architectural set, so I can't go to a 4th floor plan and pick that door out of the list. But if you had managed assets that you're trying to associate to sheets in your project, so it's not extracting it from the model, you'd still be able to do that manually and track progress against the sheets. But it is more manual labor here. If we went into, say, a foundation plan, and I'm not going to pull any specific example, but in this plan, over to the left panel in your sheets, you have assets. You can show your asset markups. And if I had any mapped assets to this, we would see the markups here. In order to mark up an asset within a sheet, so if I'm trying to highlight this wall as a foundation wall, over to the right here, the little fan that indicates an asset. We could pick the category. Let's see, actually, this one will be more of foundation. And then we can mark this up by just using these different tools. So let's basically saying, all right, I don't like the snapping. Of course, this project has a very, very subtle angle to it, but I can highlight something on my sheet, and this makes this a foundation category, and then I can specify the name of that. So it's a way to identify items on your sheets to track the progress and show those markups. So it's highlighting it based on ordered, but if I say installed, that should change the color to green. Unfortunately, currently, there is no graphic override to your 3D model that will apply the status color to an object based on its status. So ideally, if we were looking at a 3D view of the model, we'd see all of these different colors to say if components have been ordered, delivered, installed. But currently, there's no direct link to that override. I would assume, and I don't know, this is just me thinking out loud, I would assume at some point that color filtering is going to be available in the build module. It just wouldn't make sense if it doesn't. So you can kind of visually track the progress of, hey, why aren't these doors installed yet, or why haven't they been ordered, or any number of status points that you want to build into your projects. So. And I did this based on categories, so it just created a new, I think this automatically creates a new asset there when you do it the way I just did. If I go back into here, yeah, what I should have really done is pulled from, this is one of the managed assets from that spreadsheet that I pulled in. I can select that asset, just create a quick dot, and now this links to that actual component, and we can say, hey, that is startup, save, and anything that we do to the sheet will automatically update here. So go back to our managed assets. There it is, startup. And then automatically by placing that markup, it changes this. So even though I didn't pull this from the model, it still links it to the sheet that I placed that region in. You can do this with multiple sheets. So I could have that asset flagged or located in multiple areas. And beyond that, with many other things like issues, we can associate all different types of references. So if you had spec information or approved submittals for certain equipment, you could associate those documents to your assets. You could tie your manuals, your maintenance records, whatever you want. So to some extent, assets could be utilized for operations as well, utilizing the mobile app and then changing status of objects in the field. One quick example, I know I said 5 minutes ago that I would take a look at the Q&A, but beyond just using this kind of generically, like tracking actual equipment or actual objects in our projects, another thing that we've done is for a lot of owners, they might be managing really large developments that have multiple sites or maybe they're managing multiple sites with multiple projects. We've created examples where we might set up a master project in a client's hub, and for the assets, we'll actually call a project, call out an asset by a project name, and then associate links to a separate project that links you to maybe the management of that individual project. But because we're creating those data points and then linking them, there's a lot of stuff that you can do from an executive insights page where we can track data and we can track progress of an overall company, what they're currently developing, if things are under construction, during construction, closed for construction, like what the status of individual projects are, and then just using the general insights pages or even tying them to issues. There's a lot that we could do, like trigger status of something being active or inactive, and then linking it basically to a project in ACC. And there's some opportunity there to use the bridge functionality. Maybe you have a folder structure that matches up with the names of your different projects in the master plan, and we will like to dump in maybe some procurement information within the master folder. We could link that folder then into an actual project, and all of that data is just streamlined. So, all right, I'm gonna stop way over time. So I told Lori I could probably talk for 2 hours about different uses. Hopefully that was good high level overview. Okay, so it looks like the only question in there so far is from Linda. Oh, she's just saying she had to drop. So anyone have any specific questions? I probably didn't go into enough detail about the settings. I was going quickly through that and jumping around, but if there's anything
Vince, do you have an end slide, like a sort of the contact slide? I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't want to interrupt you. You're on a
let me pull this
good wave there.
Here. Cool. That one? Oh, let me back.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So I think Lori put this in the chat as well for the next session. We're going to focus on RFIs and submittal workflows. Click the link that she posted to register for that.
Yeah. So there is. So if you guys go to the chat section in here, I posted the next webcast. So that's a live link that you can register for the July 12th webcast. And I also put in the recording from the first webcast that Vince just did. Actually, I also promised that I was going to give you my email address. So yes, if anybody came in just a little bit late, yes, today's session has been recorded, and I will be editing it today and uploading it. So if you need it before, you will get a thank you for attending email next week. If you need this before then, please go ahead and send me an email and I can send it your way. So bear with me, Vince. I'm just going to type my email address in. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you heard me, but it was 2 T's. You were right.
Yes. Okay.
Elliot@rand.com. There is my email address in the chat. Okay, so now I'll go back to the. Now we do have quite a few people on the call. One of the things I've never done before is given permission for people to ask, like to actually speak.
Yeah, I think we did that last time. Worked.
Okay. So what I don't want to do, is there anybody that wants to raise their hand and ask a question out loud, or anybody that wants to test the theory that I can actually do this? I think somebody can just raise their hand. Anyway, I'll keep an eye on the chat. I think before, just before you and I went live, Vince, I think didn't you have one of the applications open? I'm just trying to open
I did have Revit open. Show this model, but just kind of had it open in case there was a question about the data that's being fed from Revit into that model extraction. But
okay, just
maybe this is a topic. Okay. Maybe there aren't any questions because, as I've found with a lot of our customers are just unaware of what the capabilities of assets are, and it's one of those maybe ancillary modules that people aren't using in build. So if anything, I hope this was really informative to everyone, and you can start to think maybe outside of the box of how you would want to manage the progress of installation and things that you're trying to keep track of as the construction process is going on. So focusing on specifically elements that we would manage during construction, kind of highlighted that today. But let me show, I think I'm able to show this, and if not, I think I have one in here called Owner Master Project that I set up just to kind of demonstrate or display either this project. No, actually, I don't want to show that one. That one has specific. I think we got this one here. So one thing we mocked up, and we just did this for a customer basically to demonstrate how an owner could manage. In this case, it was a college campus, but in assets, this isn't being extracted from a model or anything. We've got the addresses for all of these different facilities that they would manage on a campus, or even different campuses that they are managing, satellites. And we were able to come up with some different status sets. I don't know that this one has any real big custom fields. I don't think this has any custom fields, but we did something here where within the folder structure of this master plan, we have a folder separate from the asset that basically is named the same as the asset, numbered the same as the asset, and then they can manage specific information within each of these projects. The intent here is that if any project that they have on their campus is undergoing renovation, new construction, they'd be able to create a separate project in their ACC hub, named the same way, and then we would be able to link information from this master plan into that project. And then I think something else we did in here is under issues, or maybe it was sheets. We just had like an overall, just pulled from, it's probably files. Somewhere in here, we had an image of the campus map with a bunch of issues that were pinned and referenced to the assets. So we could change the status of an issue to get a visual to see which properties were undergoing either renovation, new construction. It could even just be like, you can name a whole bunch of a slew of different things that you would want to track within the management of a development, a facility, a campus. So just thinking a little bit outside the box. Assets to me is one of the most customizable areas of build, probably outside of issues, maybe even more so than issues, because we have an unlimited amount of statuses that we can associate to any individual category. And we can include custom fields, and this can all be reported, like I mentioned. Unfortunately, it's through a CSV or Excel, but yeah, hopefully some of that will get integrated back into Build at some point soon. So I do see a question from Robert Bell in the chat.
Are you
aware of anyone using Build for FM asset tracking, or is there a better approach for that? Personally, I haven't come across it yet. It's possible, especially through what I was showing. Honestly, we haven't seen too many customers utilizing the model component of assets yet. I think that would be the opportunity for a customer to do the FM asset tracking using model elements. The problem with that is that you have to make sure that your models are containing all of the different assets that are installed or that you're managing in the project. So maybe if you get an LOD 500 model, that should have everything, all of the equipment that you're tracking up to date. But there is a separate tool. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Autodesk Tandem. Tandem is really the Autodesk solution for operations and facility management. It will manage assets in that 3D model, show statuses, show the overlay. Like I was saying earlier, I wish that we had that in Build. So there's probably a better tool to do the facility management, and this would be more focused on the construction tracking, the progress tracking of assets during construction. But there's no reason to say that we can't feed the data from the assets module into a product like Tandem, so that we're not having to recreate information over again in that platform. So the data can still be exchanged. So as it goes through design to construction to operations, hopefully there's a streamlined process that we can use that will just pull those data points that we're looking for and then incorporate them into an operations level model.
Okay, excellent. All right, so with that, everybody, I hope to see you guys all in July. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.